Kevin Raber here, and I'm in Maui, Hawaii. And I've had a great few days working with the new Canon EOS R camera. Michael Durr, the Luminous-Landscape videographer, is with me. He's also been given a camera. He's actually filming this segment as well as a lot of the other segments that we've done here on the EOS R camera. And it's time to talk a little bit about hit and misses. First, though, I want to say thank you to Canon for inviting us out here and allowing us the opportunity to sit with a number of Canon people in regards to understanding the camera better, as well as working with a number of different shooting situations over the last few days. This afternoon, prior to doing this video, I talked to one of the camera designers that was responsible for putting this camera together. And this is just not a flash-in-the-pan camera answer to the mirrorless market. Apparently, from what I was told, this has been a project for quite a while. And based upon looking at the drawings and the different clay models that they had out there, it's certainly gone through a number of iterations and a lot of thought in regards to the design of the camera itself. I've talked a lot about mirrorless in the past and what I believe mirrorless should be about, and that's innovation. I've applauded Sony and Fuji and Olympus and Panasonic a number of times because of the innovation they've shown with their camera systems. And while Canon has done some really unique innovations, there's other parts that have left me scratching my head. It's a beautiful camera, first off, and when you pick it up, you can't help but think Canon. It fits in your hand comfortably, it feels good, there is a battery grip for it that will allow you to work in vertical. We've shown pictures of that. But let's just talk about one of the first misses, because it just happens to be right where my hand is. A single card slot. I mean, come on. This is a miss. They have their reasons, and they talk and tell us why it's only one card slot, but let's face it, everybody's got dual card slots today. As a photographer, pro or not, you want dual card slots. I find myself using dual card slots all the time. On my Fuji camera, I shoot RAW to one and I shoot JPEG to another with some of the different artifacts and film effects that they have available. So I can receive JPEGs on one card and RAWs on the other. It allows me to separate that quite easily when I'm going into a RAW processor. There's no excuse not to have a dual card slot today. And of course, this is a single UHS-C card slot. It requires the SD cards that have all those extra contacts. It's a very fast card. You might be okay with it. I can shoot with it, as I have for the last few days, but I've come to depend on dual card slots in 2018. Do you all know I'm in Hawaii, right? So I got to get this flowery thing off my head. It's just... Let's look at this camera a little bit and go from there. First off, they've done some really nice things with it and some things that I question. Do you see a joystick on the back of this camera somewhere? No. They instead have decided they were going to put a touch-sensitive screen where you can move your focus points all around. And you know, you can touch it, you can move your focus point wherever you want, and it's really clever. However, it's great when it's sitting on your neck like this and you're working with it. It's not so great when I'm shooting with this and now the neck strap is in the way of trying to figure out where the autofocus is. I just can't do it because the neck strap is in the way. But if I had a joystick, I would have had no problem. So another miss for Canon. Let's look at a win, a hit. Instead of putting a joystick, Canon put this little horizontal multifunction bar up here. And it's really quite clever. It allows you to take this little touch-sensitive bar and program it for whatever you might want to use it for. I've programmed mine for magnification on the left side and displaying or not displaying the histogram on the other. So if I'm shooting and I want to see what I'm looking at in a magnified version, I just touch the bar and hold it and it turns on and I see an enlarged portion. If I want to see the histogram to see what my exposure looks like, I touch the right side of the bar and I get my histogram. Now, how well this is going to work with gloves on, for example, that's something nobody's talked about yet. So, while it might be a hit, it could be a miss. So I'm not sure how this is going to work with gloves. Also, I'm not sure how this touchscreen, which they depend so much on in the design of this camera, will work with gloves. All right? Now, it's really, really nice, okay? First off, Canon's done a great job with their menu system. And I can say, I want that menu, I want that selection, and go into it. Also, they were very clever on a number of their customized settings to actually show diagrams. So when you actually set up, for example, the manual function button over here, the MFN, you go in and when you're setting these settings, you get like a picture of the camera and you get an illustration of what each button that can be set is all about. There's a side for video and there's a side for stills, and you just select it. And when you select it, it opens up all the choices that are available for that menu and you select what you want. That's a hit. Okay, it's brilliant. The brilliant design, brilliant use of the menu systems. But once again, I don't know how well it'll work with gloves on. I shoot in a lot of polar regions, Antarctica, Svalbard, Greenland, and Iceland. And there are a lot of times where I'm not using my fingers. So that we'll have to wait and see if it works out right. The feel of the camera, though, is quite nice. When you're holding the camera and you're working the buttons, it's the traditional buttons that you've come to expect with Canon. All right, so that's a hit. Essentially, what they've basically done is taken the 5D Mark IV and put a mirrorless system inside it. But they've also done something new with their lenses. They've released 4 new lenses. We've talked about these already, and they're brilliant lenses, but look at the size of this bugger. This is a 50 millimeter 1.2. I mean, it's heavy, and it's a beautiful lens, because it's 1.2. Here we are in mirrorless. Part of the mirrorless thing is supposed to go to being smaller and lighter in size. Take the lens off of this camera pretty much weighs just a little less than, say, the 5D Mark IV. So it's not really that much smaller. It is thinner, okay, because it doesn't have the big mirror box, and it's thinner by a considerable amount of space. But look at the size of these lenses. This is a 24-105, and it weighs just as much, give or take a little bit, as the existing 24-105. So they talk a lot about what they can do with their optics, and they've done some clever things with the optics and with the new mounting flange back here. But size isn't obviously one of them, at least with some of the things that they showed us at this point. So this is kind of a hit and miss. Another thing with all the new S lenses that they will be releasing in the future is an addition of a new ring. Now, here's innovation. Here's hit. Okay, this is the kind of stuff that I like, because somebody's thinking outside the box and somebody's answering a problem that a lot of us have had in the past. So here we have the 24-105 zoom, and we have the zoom, and we have the focus, which we've come to expect, but we have a third ring. And this is a customizable third ring that can be set for anything from ISO to exposure compensation. Once again, it's all relative to how you might want to shoot. If I'm shooting landscapes, for example, exposure compensation might be important. And I'll set up a customizable bank just for when I'm doing landscape photography. On this trip, I also did a lot of photography with people on it. So I might have a customizable bank for doing portraits and people. And in that case, I might program this lens ring for another option. We'll have to wait and see. Speaking of, okay, and this might be another miss, is the sensor they've put into this camera is the same sensor, 30 megapixel sensor, that was in 5D Mark IV. 4-year-old technology. I mean, why would you do that? Why would you put in, with all the new technology that's gone into sensors lately, you know, back illuminated sensors and some of the capabilities of what these sensors can do, put in an old sensor into the newest state-of-the-art mirrorless camera that you're introducing to the world? This one just, I don't get. Cameras from some of the other manufacturers, the Sonys, the Fujis, they're shooting at incredible frame rates, 20 frames per second, 11 frames per second. You know, they've got great buffers. I mean, they're doing a great job. So this camera with this sensor is shooting 8 frames per second, but that's single autofocus. If you want to shoot continuous autofocus, you are racked down to 5 frames per second. Oh, come on, man. If I was a wedding photographer and I wanted to capture the bouquet throw, I'd want as many frames per second as I could. As that bride releases that bouquet and that bouquet falls down and is reached for and grabbed by, hopefully, the next lucky bride. But 5 frames per second just isn't cutting it. I mean, that's 1970, for God's sakes. That's what I used to shoot at back in the day. So that's a miss. Another thing, no IBS. Now, when IBS came out, I got spoiled. And we were spoiled when it was put into the Olympus cameras. They were one of the innovators of this. And then Sony put it in. And all of a sudden, new possibilities were open to us. We were shooting in 1/8 of a second and getting sharp images. And you know, if you're a photographer and you want to do certain kinds of photographies, maybe on the streets or maybe under low light situations, you end up counting on these new technologies and expect to see these same technologies appear in the newest cameras that show up on the market. Now, you know, they say that the sensor has digital stabilization, and they combine it with the IS of the lens, and okay, you're sort of there. Yeah, but you're sort of there yesteryear. That's what you were doing before you went mirrorless. Now you're mirrorless. You know, now you've got these capabilities. I don't think there's an excuse why there shouldn't have been an IBIS in this camera system. Another thing that Canon did, which is kind of cool, okay, this is a hit, is when you turn your camera off, and it's an odd place to put an off switch, but there it is. I think they could have used it differently, but when you turn the camera off and you unmount the lens, the shutter closes and protects the sensor. I do like the idea of protecting the sensor. I just got back from a few weeks of shooting in the Palouse, and that's a super dirty, dusty environment. And as a result, being able to have the sensor open like this, even in this environment for this long, and not have to worry about any issues on the sensor is pretty cool. So this is a nice feature that is on here now, so that's pretty cool. All the ports are located on this side of the camera. There is a remote port. There is a microphone and a headphone port. And Michael's using that right now, one with the microphone going into it and with the headphones coming out of it. There is an HDMI port and a USB port, and you can actually charge the camera through the USB port, also with the battery in there. Now, here's a winning part. Okay, this is a hit. This screen on the back here is a 3.1-inch screen. Is brilliant. They've hit it out of the ballpark with this screen, in my opinion. It's bright. I've hadn't had any problem using it outdoors in some of the bright sunlight we've had here, and trust me, we've had some bright sunlight. But what's nice is the fact that it rotates all the way around, and now to a vlogger's delight, you can end up doing vlogging and seeing yourself. Let me just see. Looking good. However, you know, you're going to need to be a good weightlifter to be doing this. And so there's a hit, but let's talk about an immediate miss. If I am doing vlogging, I got a 1.7 crop factor if I'm doing 4K. Holy cow, what were they thinking? I mean, come on. Today, why can't we do full frame 4K capture like some of the other guys are doing? Maybe because it's still the same sensor that came out of the 5D Mark IV. All right, miss in my opinion, because now we have to, you know, find all sorts of different lenses to do videos and put up with the crop factor to get those done. The other thing that's a miss, as nice as this screen is, I tend to like to shoot portraits with my flippy out screen where I can kind of just bend over, put the camera low, and just flip the screen out. Well, there's no easy flipping out of the screen. To do that, to bend down low to do that, I've actually got to turn the screen all the way out to the side and then set it up like that. To me, this is begging for a problem because, you know, if I just hit it the wrong way, I could be breaking it off. So, yes, it's cool that I can do vlogging and see myself. Maybe they could have flipped it up. But the fact that I have to separate it from the camera and twist it around to do low angle shots is kind of like a half miss. If I can take a minute before I go on, I want to just talk a little bit about my neck straps here and take these off. Whenever I test a camera, rather than use the camera manufacturer's neck strap, which I usually find uncomfortable, plus I hate putting them through these loopy loops, I use the Peak Design straps. Well, If you give me 1 second, I want to undo this strap and just get it off the table because it is kind of cumbersome to work with. And of course, if you haven't used Peak Design straps, they're really good. You can clip them on and off and have all sorts of options, but now I basically have a camera without any straps. Really good when it's on a tripod in windy situations and the strap doesn't have to be blowing. I want to talk about autofocus for a second and my experiences over the last few days with autofocus. Autofocus is really good. It is super fast. They have 5,900 and some odd autofocus points. Now, Michael and I sat with one of the tech people from Canon for over 2 hours and we did an extreme video. It will be a long video, but if you're thinking of purchasing this camera, it's a video you definitely have to watch because we have one of the most knowledgeable Canon people, Brandon Chin, and he goes through everything with us. And we learned an awful lot. And one of the things they've done a lot on, with some hits and misses, is autofocus. First off, once you get the hang of the autofocus system on the Canon, it is really fast. Okay, so I couldn't be any happier with it. I have not really tested it in any way that I would be happy talking about things as far as the servo auto tracking goes. But on a limited test that I've done, it seems to hold pretty true in regards to autofocus. Now, Canon kind of did a half-assed job with face detect eye autofocus. Now, with other camera systems, and once again, you know, we come to judge camera systems by the bar set by others. And Sony has a brilliant face detect eye AF. And I'm talking so brilliant that it works in continuous autofocus, and if that subject is moving around and you push IAF on, it locks onto the eye, don't ask me how it does it, and it doesn't lose it. And if the person turns around and then comes back into frame, it automatically picks up that eye again and continues shooting. And it's tack sharp. I mean, the sharpness coming out of this IAF and face detect is really brilliant. Well, Canon has face detect and IAF, and it's sort of okay, but you can only use it in single shot. And I'm not quite sure how good that is, because unless I've got somebody sitting on a stool and I have my camera on a tripod, and I say face detect, and I push it down, and then I do my eye detect, and just shoot a single shot, you know, got it maybe. I mean, really for IAF to be truly workable, it's got to work in continuous autofocus, and it doesn't do it here. But in the single side of things, I was shooting a subject both more or less full length, 3/4 length, and headshots, and the face detect immediately found the face, and it hit pretty much on the eye most of the time. I think it needs a lot of refinement, and I do hope that they find a way to set their IAF up to do continuous autofocus on the eye. There is talk going through the group here that Canon is talking about firmware upgrades to even enhance some of the features of this camera, and this would be one of those features. It's a firmware update. They just got to put it in and change it. So maybe Canon's going to adopt the ways that our friends at Fuji have done so well over the years and upgrade some of these cameras and some of the features, specifically because it's new, with some firmware updates as soon as they can. So as far as I'm concerned on the autofocus, it's a hit on speed, it's a hit on versatility, it's a hit on the number of spots that it autofocuses on, it's a miss on the face detect, eye detect side of things. It'll work on single shot, but it won't work on continuous. You know, Fuji just put out the XT3, and from what I have seen on that, the continuous autofocus face detect with eye detect is absolutely top-notch, right up there with what we've come to expect from Sony and what we've come to expect from all the camera companies releasing new cameras. There's a lot more I can talk about with this camera. You know, they've got some brilliant lenses. They've got an adapter. Now, this is something I think is really important, because one of the things we're going to get into real here is, like, who is this camera for? Now, Canon has one very large inventory of EF lenses, and they are brilliant lenses. They're fantastic lenses. in the past when I've owned Canon cameras, I've had maybe 15 lenses at one time, and I was just the happiest can be with them. However, this camera system is introduced only with 4 lenses, and what it has been said to us is that this is a mirrorless camera designed for the existing Canon user that wants to use not only the newest lenses and a mirrorless camera, but also want to continue using with full functionality all their EF lenses. And this is a typical adapter. They have 3 adapters they put out. One is a straight adapter with just a straight adapter. One is this adapter, which will probably be the most popular as it has the control ring. The control ring that is on the S lenses that is programmable can now be used with the EF lenses, any of the EF lenses, and be programmable there. And the third adapter they put out has a drop-in filter. Now this is brilliant. Any of you that have used that brilliant, huge, I think it's an 11 to 35 millimeter wide-angle lens that has this giant bubble of a piece of glass on the front where you can't put a filter, but you want to go out and photograph the sky with a blur or a waterfall or the ocean at long exposure and you can't put a neutral density filter on it? Well, now buy this mirrorless camera, buy the adapter with the drop-in variable density, neutral density. I believe they said it has 9 stops. You just have a dial and you turn it and it's a variable ND. And now you can use that lens for all the things you've ever wanted to use it for. And it also has a polarizing filter. So if you want to not have to buy a gigantic piece of glass for some of that long lenses that you have, you can now use a polarizing filter also that operates the same way with this adapter. So here's a plus for getting this mirrorless camera system. Now, in our discussions with Canon, we were asking them, who is the customer? Do they expect to sway new people to buy this camera system? And they were pretty blunt with us. Their intention right now is to offer a mirrorless solution for the existing Canon camera users that want mirrorless and the benefits of what mirrorless has to offer. Now, this mirrorless camera has a lot to offer. Okay? It has its misses and hits, as we've talked about. But the viewfinder is extremely brilliant, so that if you're coming over from the DSLR side of things, you're going to find that the viewfinder is surprisingly good. As you're going to look through it, you're going to think that you're looking through a reflex viewfinder, but you've got all the digital outputs and the digital benefits that come along with it. And imagine using a mirrorless camera where if you stop down the system, you can actually see the true effect of what your exposure is going to be. So this is the pluses of what they're looking for. They're not looking to bring in new customers. Yes, they'll probably bring in a few, but this camera system's probably not quite there yet where they're going to throw the hook out and try to reel in new users. Okay? They're trying to stop, as probably Nikon is too, the migration of their existing customers over to platforms like Sony and Fuji. This is not a stopgap. Okay, now it is kind of a stopgap if you think of it in that terms, but this camera is not a stopgap camera. Regardless of what I've said were the misses, and of course there are a lot of good hits, it's a great offering for a first time out that still leaves me scratching my head. Could have been a new sensor, could have been a lot of other things. So in my opinion, it's not a hit overall, but it's an introduction to a solution that I am sure, and of course they have told this to us in no uncertain terms, will mature with, this is the first in the line of cameras that we'll be introducing, and the first 4 lenses of a new lens line, the S lens line, that we'll be introducing. So, will Canon make it over the long run? Will we see things over the next few years that will convince us and others that maybe it's time to just buy into the Canon system? Time will tell. Nikon's got the same issue. Meanwhile, Fuji's doing a beautiful job of adding to their camera line, adding to the versatility of the needs of the customers. They've got a lens lineup that is performing well, and of course they're true mirrorless. Even though they're APS-C, they're small, compact, well, in many cases light. Some of the lenses aren't, but hey, that's another story. They offer an IBS solution, and now they're really kicking ass and moving really good into the video side of things. Canon, just because you now have a mirrorless camera doesn't mean you have to stop here. To make this camera succeed, to really wow everybody, you've got to start looking really hard at what everybody else is doing and take your innovations further. You've got to innovate in the sensor technology. You've got to innovate in the AF side of things, specifically when it comes to continuous autofocus. You've got to up the frame rate so that we can shoot quicker and faster. No sports photographer is going to buy this camera. So you're not going to see this camera on the football field shooting sports. However, you can certainly see a Sony A9 camera out there at 20 frames per second doing that. Oh, I forgot to mention, it does have silent shutter. So hey, that's a plus, you know. You at least want to be quiet when you shoot. It's a fun camera to shoot with, but hey, it leaves some questions. I don't know how I'm going to use the touchscreen in the wintertime. I don't know why you left the joystick out. I don't know what you were thinking when you only put one SD card slot in there. And for heaven's sakes, why a cropped video? However, a lot of the other things, the fast autofocus, and by the way, the autofocus does a great job in the dark. We had a outdoor event the other night, and I did a lot of shooting, and it really works well under low light conditions, and they're claiming an EV -6. So we'll test it more and see how it works further. Canon has at least come back into the fray, and it's at least something that I am now considering, that in the future, if some of these needs that I've pointed out in this video are addressed, I may decide that Canon has a place on a shelf next to my Sony, Fuji, Olympus, and Panasonics. So Canon, job sort of well done. I want to say thanks once again for inviting us down here. It's been great to experience and see what you're doing. You're on the right track, but you're not there yet. To my readers, I want to say thank you. Be sure you check out our other video where we go into the great depth and detail in regards to the menus and some of the questions and reasons behind what we're talked about here. And we're going to go a little bit further and offer one more review on this once we have raw processing capability and so forth. And because we get to keep these cameras a little while, we'll also do a little bit more on the video. But for now, the hits and misses is where we are. I want to say thanks for watching, and hey, I'll see you on the Luminous Landscape.